We're up to the Mishnah Mitzvah Zaymer. We got up to here already? Okay. So Zok Tehel Gemara. Mitzvah Ha'omer Lahavi Min HaKaret. You need to bring the barley that you harvest for the Minchas Ha'omer from close to Yerushalayim, from a place that's close to Yerushalayim, not too far away. Okay. Loi Biker Min HaKarev. What if there are no ripened barley from a closer source? So Gemara, loy bikir akar Yerushalayim li Yerushalayim mevi noisay mikol mokim. You bring from wherever you can get. Ma'isa, once upon a time, Sheba Omer Gagois Tzrifim, from a city called Gagois Tzrifim, which was far from Yerushalayim, and the Shtei Alechem was wheat mi bigas ein suiker. So you see that if they have to go far away, they went far away. Zokamar, my time. Why was it so important that it has to be from nearby? Mishum Carmel, either because Rashi says Carmel is takriv rach umale. You want it to be soft, moist, fresh barley, not dried out. And if it were to be carried from far away, Noshav Lozika, Rashi says, it would be subject to the winds and it would dry it out along the way and it wouldn't be Carmel. That's one shot. If you're closer, you're not allowed to take from a farther away place. Okay,
don't they dry it out before they make?
I was wondering, how do you put it into a mill while it's still soft?
Yeah, you can't.
I'm not sure because Rashi says it has to be nosh. It has to be raka uvinim melas. But yeah, you could like squish it in your hand. I guess there was a way to grind moist wheat, but it sounds like it would be pretty hard to do.
No, I think they dry it out over fire or heat in the base of Migdash. But if it was already dried, why it would be unnecessary? That should
be better even. It's ready to go.
Yeah,
I don't know. So if it's Carmel, it's exclusive, and if it's alt Eimavir and Ala Mitzvahs, so that is because it's the closest. Okay. There was actually a civil war in the Beis Chashmonai, and what happened was there was a king died. I think his wife was left over. I don't remember all the names. ArtScroll has all the names, and there were two brothers, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, and it's a shaila in the sugyas who the mother wanted to be the next king and who didn't want to give up the power of Yerushalayim. So because of that, one brother's Malchus was operating a siege around Yerushalayim, and the Malchus that was laying the siege that was outside Yerushalayim got the Romans to get involved to help them. So that's already getting the goyim involved in our own internal fights, and that's really what ended up bringing us down. So our Gemara says it was Hyrcanus mi b'chutz, and it was Aristobulus mi b'fnim, and b'chol yom v'yom ha'ymashalshin lahen dinarin b'kupa. Every day, those from the inside would lower down on the outside money, umalin lahem tamidin. And the people on the outside, even they had their red line, even though they were putting a siege around the city, but they weren't going to be mevatel the carbon tummet. There was an old guy, he knew how to use certain signals that the Yevonim knew, so therefore he had a way of communicating. He was a trader, and he had a way of communicating with the people outside in a way that the people inside won't know that he's doing this. It sounds very much like what the Mossad does, right? They infiltrated the Malchus on the inside of Yerushalayim, and he had a way to transmit communications that would be undetected. Laws lahem bechachmas Yevonis. Chachmas Yevonis, I believe, was the ancient version of Morse code. Right? So, Laws lahem bechachmas Yevonis. He sent him in Chachmas Yevonis, and he told him, Omer lahen, Kozman shasukim ba'avoida as long as they're going to keep the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash going, they have that shmira from the Beis Hamikdash. Ein nimsarim biyetchem. L'machar shilshu lem lidarim bekupa v'helu lehen chazir. It's funny that the every Yid knows that the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash is a shmira. It took this old guy to uncover this big eureka news. I don't know exactly what happened. But what they did is, Vehel and Chazir, why didn't they just say, we're not sending you anything? Like, was it gefelt to send up a Chazir? Like, I never got what the story was. All they had to do was take the money and not send. The next day they weren't getting money anyway. The pig is trying to resist going up the wall. So not siparnav b'chayma. Now I don't think pigs have nails; they have hoofs, but they push their hoofs to stop the upward motion. V'nizdaza Eretz Yisrael arba me'as parsa al arba me'as parsa. There was a massive earthquake. Ba'oisa Shah Amru. At that time, Chazal made a halacha. Wasn't a halacha; they said a klola. Amru they said or sheyigadel chazir. It's usher to raise pigs. V'or sheyilamed b'noi chachmas yivanis, which probably needs a lot of Torah because that's like outlying guns in America today. That's not the problem. But Chazal are wise and they know what the problem is. So they said it's also to be Megad L'Chazir because of this story, and it's also to teach your child Chacham Shivanis, and we know there are exceptions to that for people who have to be Mishtadel with the Gemara discusses people who have to be Mishtadel with the Menachos, they could learn Chacham Shivanis. And there was a story said over that occurred in that period of time. What does it have to do with that time? So Rashi tells us another thing occurred during the time of the siege. And Rashi says, the people who were laying siege on the city, they also destroyed all the things that were around Yerushalayim, including the source of the Omer and the source of the Shtei Alechem. So they had to go far away to find these things. So therefore, and now the Gemara goes to tell us the story of what happened. Now there is a whole controversy in Tosfos as to when this occurred. If it was in the days of Horus, which would have been much later, there's a whole discussion as to when these stories occurred in the history of the Beis Hamikdash, both Bati Mikdash. Yeah, but Tosfos says that it could be this takana was made. Tosfos ends up saying there was a time where it was made as a takana but wasn't accepted, and then later on it was accepted because Tosfos says the story here happened long before another story where they were also geyserit. So Tosfos says it could be they were first geyserit, but it wasn't really accepted by Klal Yisrael as a restriction, and then they accepted it upon themselves later. Because Tosfos says in Tomer v'aloi b'pulmus shel Titus gazru. It was by the days of Titus, not by the days of the Yevanim, which I believe is later. So v'tiritz Rabbi Yaakov Reb Shimon the meikar gazru v'lo kiblu minayu u'b'soiv gazru v'kiblu minayu, which in and of itself raises a question, is because we know that by the Ma'aseh of Mordechai Tzaddik, which was long before this story, it was in between the two Bati Midrashim. There was already a Kimu v'Kiblu. Klal Yisrael had already made a commitment that they will listen to all of the guidance of Chazal, right? And that's what gets us through to the Geula, as a result he taught us. So Ibazoi, Vais Reis, even after the Kimu v'Kiblu, it still wasn't rock solid because this Gzeira, it took a couple of years until they actually accepted a Gzeira that Chazal put into place. Or the Oidish, the second teretz fits in. Originally, they just said one should be cursed. They didn't outlaw it, but they said you should be cursed if you do it. And then later on, they were mekabelit. So that would stem with Kimu v'Kiblu because they did accept right away, except the original Gzeir that the Rabban made was not to outlaw it, but merely to curse somebody who would do that. Okay, so now we have the interesting story. Kimata Omer, the time to bring the carbon Omer arrived. Lahaviyodim Heichaisi, Heichais Omer. They didn't know where in the world are they going to find Omer from. Achrazu, they announced, does anybody know where we can get a source of barley? Also, there was someone who approached, but he wasn't able to speak. He was able to hear what was going on, but he was not able to speak. He didn't have the ability to speak. So he had to use sign language to convey what he wanted to convey. He put one of his hands on the roof, and one on like a teepee type of tent. So that's a sign of Gag, Trif. Amalahu, Mordechai. Mordechai told him. Rashi says this is the Mordechai Atzadik from the Megillah. The problem is, Octosis, the timeline doesn't add up because this is at the end of the second Beis Hamikdash period, while Mordechai Atzadik lived during the 70 years in between the two Batim Mikdashos. If this would be true, Mordechai would have been living for hundreds of years. Tosha says that after Mordechai Atzadik died, his position begun to be called Mordechai. So now the position of the head advisor to the king was called the Mordechai. So that's what it means. It was the Mordechai of that generation said, Mi ikaduchta. He asked around, the Oilam who's familiar with geography. Mi ikaduchta, the Shema Gagois Tzarifin, Oi Tzarifin Gagois?
I just want both Mordecai and Esther weren't their real names.
It was a title.
They were titles, yeah. Esther, we know her name was Hadassah, but Mordecai, the Chazal say somewhere that it was either Chage, Zachari, or Malachai. Because, and it doesn't, because the Avodah Zorah, the main Avodah Zorahs for Persia were Ishtar, the female Avodah Zorah, and Marduk, the male. And that can't be a coincidence. So it means Lord, some kind of a Lord.
So you got to think twice before you name your son Mordechai.
It came to mean something else, but in ancient Persia, they're very closely named to the Avodah Zarah.
So it makes sense that, like I said, Mom like the word Lord. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be Jimmy. Mordechai, the leader, happened to be the son of, which explains why he got the job. So what are you saying? He's saying, how come, if it's not his real name, how can it say Mordechai ben Shimi ben Kish? It's not, his name wasn't Mordechai. The Torah just his name's not relevant. What's relevant to who his father was. So anyway, so Botku v'Ashkechua, they went and they found it in Gagas Trifim. So a couple of months later, by Shavuos, they were now looking for wheat for the Shtei Lechem. Again, again they announced, does anybody know where we can find some? The gentleman came along again. He put one of his hands on his eye, and one on the hole of the hinge of a door. Amalu Mordechai, the Shema Ayin Sukkar or Sukkar Ayin, Botku v'Ishtakchu v'Ishkechu, and they found the city. Hanu Shalosh Noshim, the Aisu Shalosh Kinim. There were three women. Now we're talking about the wisdom of Mordechai. There's three women who each brought a set of birds to be makrib. Chad Omer, one said Lizivasi, so you would think she became a Zava. And when she becomes Tahar from her Ziva, she has to bring a Chatas and an Oila, two birds. The Chad Omer Liamasi, for my Yam. Again, the question is, what does it mean? It's a cryptic expression. What do you mean for my Yam, for my ocean? The Chad Omer Lo'inasi, for my time. Savar mina, the Olam thought, Zivasi means she was a Zava. Liamasi also means a Zava. It's a different way of expressing it. It's saying, Liamasi mamish. My internals flowed out of me. Meaning, it's like a Yam. She also means Ziva. And Leilasa means Leinasa, the time of the month. So they're all ways of saying the same thing. The Kulu, all of them would mean Chada Chatos v'Chada Oila. Of the pair of birds you brought, one will be a Chatos, one will be an Oila. Abel Mordechai, don't be so sure that that's what she meant. That's what these women meant. Shema Bizoiv Sikna. Maybe when the woman said Lazivasi, she didn't mean I'm bringing the carbon ziva. She just meant that I was having a horrible flow during my period, and I thought I would lose my life from such a great loss of blood, and I was saved. So because of that, I'm bringing two birds as an oilas nedava, because I want to show great gratitude to the Rebbeinu Shalom for saving my life. Or Biyamosi was Shema Biyam Sichna. Maybe she was in the ocean and she was in danger. Maybe she had to traverse the Straits of Hormuz. Or Shema Be'ena Sichna. Or maybe she had an eye infection. And that's what she's referring to. The Chulu oilas tenu, and then all of these birds are oilas and not one in oila, one in chatas. Bodok vashkach, they looked into the matter and they discovered that that's exactly what happened. Behind it, Tnan, and that's what the Mishnah says when it talks about all of the different pushkas that they had in the base of Mikdash for people to put money in who had to bring karbanos. It says Psachia ala Kinin. Psachia was the name of the person who was in charge of the kinim that were the birds that were brought. And who is this Psachia? Zeh Mordechai. He was really Mordechai. Alama Nikra Shmoy Psachia. Why did they call him by the name Psachia? Shepesech Dvorim Vidarshan. He opens up words that are cryptic. He has a deeper understanding of what the people's intention are when they say things, like Yamosi or Inosi, like we just had. And V'yodea B'shivim Lashon. And he was able to speak all 70 languages. Zok to Gemara, that doesn't make Psachio special. Kulu Sanhedrin Nami Yodi Shivim Lashon. All of the Sanhedrin also knew all 70 languages. Domar B'yochanan, Emo Shivim B'Sanhedrin, Elo Balei Chachma, Balei Mara, Balei Koima, Balei Zikna. They have to be wise, they have to look good, they have to be big and strong, they have to be experienced. Balik Shofim, they have to know Kishuf. Why do they have to know Kishuf? Rashi says, because if they judge someone that is Chayiv Misa, and the fellow uses Kishuf to prevent the death from occurring, they'll be able to out Kishuf him. Tosha says, it's because if they're paskening on somebody who did Kishuf, they need to know what Kishuf is, they need to know the rules of Kishuf, so they can determine if it is. V'yodim shivim loshen, and they had to know 70 languages. Shaloi teis and hedin shemas mi pia torgaman, because even hearing it from a witness through an interpreter is called hearsay. They have to directly hear it from the aid. So what it must mean is what was special about Psachia. The teretz is Psachia had something even more than what the standard member of Sanhedrin required. To have a bayil lishni. He was able to Rashi's boilel u'ma'arv halashonos. He was able to mix up different terms, v'darshan and darshan them, as Rashi did, like ein zucker and gagos trifim. V'hanyu dekarle Mordechai Balshan. He was called the Balshan because he knew how to use different languages to understand what people said. V'darsh, and he would darshan them. V'hanyu Mordechai Balshan. That's why Mordechai was called a Balshan. He knew how to mix things together. Tosfos asks that not everybody had to know the foreign languages, as long as there were some people that knew it could help. So Tosfos says that's only for Din Mamnis, but for Din Nefashos, everybody has to hear it in the testimonies in a language that they understood. What's interesting is we also learned that they have to know Kishuf. Why do they have to know Kishuf? So they could paskin on things. If I remember, there's a story in Novi where Shaul HaMelech hired a woman who knew Kishuf to bring up Shmuel. And I remember, I don't know where the Gemara is, but I remember learning a Gemara about it that said, how could he have had someone like that in his employ? How could he have known such a person? That's Kishuf. So it said that she was the government's expert witness on Kishuf. So if Bezdin ever had a question about Kshufim, because they were paskening on the Shaila, they would reach out to her as an expert. But it's mashma that they themselves had to be experts. So again, I don't know the details, but I remember such a thing. Talk to Mishnah Vayter. Keitzad hein oisen. How exactly would they prepare for the Omer? Shlucha Bezin yotzim erev Yom Tov. Shlucha Bezin would go out from erev Pesach. V'oisen oisoi krichos b'mechuber lakarka. They would already determine and designate before Pesach which bundle of wheat that they're going to cut down, and they would wrap something around it to indicate this is what we're going to do. It was also bundled already, so it would be able to get cut very fast and easy. Kol hayari says smuchas l'sham miskanskos l'sham kidei sheyeh niktar be'esek gadol. Everyone who lived in that whole area would go out to swarm this ceremony of cutting the Omer on Yom Tov. And again, the Rishonim tell us it's because, again, to show the Baitusim that it's not Mimachos Shabbos, it's not on a Sunday, it's Bedavka, the second day of Yom Tov. So the cutting of the Omer was done with great fanfare. Kideshi Niksha Be'esa Gadol. Kivan Shech Shicha, the moment it became dark, meaning this happens on the very first day of Yom Tov, they're waiting until Chalamoid to cut it down. So as soon as it becomes dark, Omer Lehen, the Kaitzer asks the Bnei Yorais that are standing there, Omer Lehen, Ba Shemesh, did the sun set? So they made a whole performance around this. Amar Hain, they said yes. That's the second time. Ba Shemesh Amar Hain. The Gemara is going to say they actually asked 3 times. Then he picked up the sickle. Magozu, should I use this knife to cut down the grain? Amar Hain. Magozu, Amar Hain. Kupazu, where should I put the grain when I cut it? Into this basket? Amar Hain. Kupazu, Amar Hain. And the Shabbos, if it was Shabbos, Amar Lahen, Shabbazu, Amar Hain, Shabbazu, Amar Hain. Then he asked, Exar, should I go? Shalosh pa'amim al kol dalver v'davar. Each thing was repeated 3 times again to create a big matzav. Hein. Kol kach lama. Frankly, Mishnah, why do you need such a long process, such a ceremony, such a big tararam? Mipnaya baitusim shoyu oimrim ein ksiris oimer b'matzah yom tov. Because they said they didn't cut it b'matzah yom tov. They all said that they cut it b'matzah Shabbos. So we wanted to publicize it very much, and this is how it was done. I think so, yeah. Meant sunset. Tanarbun, Elon Yemaya. There are special days in our Jewish calendar that very good things happened, and due to that, some of these days were restricted from fasting, but not from Hesped, and some of these days are not only restricted from fasting, but also from Hesped. So Elon Yemaya Deloilis Ana Behind, Umikzasain Deloil Lemisbeit Behind. These are days that you can't fast, and some of them you can't even say a Hesped. From the Rosh Chodesh until the day 8, Itoikim Tamida. The Talmud was set up, and we're going to soon see is that there was also an argument as to one of the halachas of the Karban Talmud, and it was clarified how the Talmud's brought. The Baitusim were proven to be wrong. That is a simcha. Therefore, the loyla mispid, it was such a great simcha, not only can't you fast, you can't even have a hesped. Umitmanya beivat soif moyada, and from the 8th day of Nisan until after Pesach, itoisiv chagad shvuaya, that's when we proved the right days of when Shavuos is, and therefore the loyla mispid. Again, you don't say a hesped. Mereish yarchad in Nisan, batmanya bei, but what does that mean? The Tzedokim would say that the Korban Talmud does not necessarily have to be brought from the monies of the tzibur; it can be brought from private money. My drosh, where did they see such a drasha? It says as a kevish ha'echad taseh b'boiker. So they had a pretty good argument because there is a way to misinterpret the pasuk. Taseh is a lashon yochid. Taseh bein rabayim. So Maya Hadru, how did they prove that in fact it was brought by the Moish Tzibur? Because it says as Karbani Lachmi Lishai Tishmeru. Tishmeru is a lashon of Rabbim, Shiyukulan Boyim Mitrumas Alishka. So that's how they resolved the Talmud. That was a big Yom Tov. Mitmanya Beivat Seif Moyada Itois of Chagad Shvuaya, and therefore they decided to Lismit, the little mispah. They didn't have a hesped. What was the controversy about over there? Over there, they didn't even have such an argument. So Nitfal Lahem Rabbi Yechel Mitzakei. Rabbi Yechel Mitzakei decided to engage them. V'yomalem Shaitim, idiots, what you are. Minayin lachem. Where do you even have such a makar? Bishlama, you might have had a mistaken makar, but a Korban Talmud. But here, there's no basis whatsoever for your argument. Nobody was able to answer Rabbi Yochanan's taina until this guy got up. this guy dared to be mefatfet kenegdoi. How does the article touch mefatfet? Taunted Rabbi Yochanan Zakai. The Omar, and that you'll see Rabbi Yochanan Zakai ripped him to shreds. The Omar Moshe Rabbeinu, Oyev Yisrael Hoya. Moshe Rabbeinu, was he not an Oyev Yisrael? Surely he was an Oyev Yisrael. V'yodeya, and he knew Shatzeres Yoy Mecharu, and he knew that Shavuos is only one day. So therefore, Omad v'tikna achar Shabbos, he set it up that it should be on a Sunday. Why? Kadesh Yisrael Mizangen Shnei Yomim. This way, it would make for a longer Yom Tov. If the Korban Omer was only brought, if it was only brought on Shavuos Menachos Shabbos, the day. I'm sorry, if it would only be brought, if the Korban Omer was brought the day after the first day Yom Tov, there's only be one day Yom Tov. But if it makes on Shabbos, there'll be 2 days. Kadesh Yisrael Mizangen Shnei Yomim. Kara Allah of Mikrazeh, and he quoted this pasuk. You see, it should have taken 11 days to get from Chayev Derech Harseir. So what happened was Rabbi Yochanan said, your whole basis is on the basis that Moshe Rabbeinu would have wanted to make an extra day of Yom Tov. I'm going to show you Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't so good. He didn't love Klai so much. He wasn't trying to save him anything. Why? Because that Achados Yom Mecharev Derech Haseir. V'im Moshe Rabbeinu Oyev Yisrael. If Moshe Rabbeinu was really an Oyev Yisrael, this is the Rabbi Yochanan Zakai is telling this guy, Lama Ichran b'Midbar Abam Shana. In 11 days, they could have gotten to where they had to go. So Vos Epis, Moshe Rabbeinu kept them 40 days. Elamai, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't care about them. So your raya is not a good raya. I'm sorry? Obviously, he's just trying to push him off. So Amalei Rebbe Bekachat the Patrani, come on. You're telling me a ridiculous svara. What are you're pushing me off? Amalei Shaita. You don't deserve that we should even respond to your nonsense. Shaita. Would you think we have to deal with your nonsense? The Heilige Torah has to deal with your nonsense? We don't have to deal with your nonsense. We have one pasuk that says about Sirius Omer, it's 50 days. Is it 7 weeks or is it 50 days? Can be Yom Tov shechol yois b'Shabbos. If Yom Tov fell out on Shabbos, then it's Sheva Shabbos. It's Tamim Tiyana. But can be Yom Tov shechol yois b'Shabbos Shabbos, then it's 50 days. So you see clearly the Torah is saying that it doesn't matter if Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos or not. So I just want to go back a second. Why is it that if it's Menachos or Shabbos, why is that better? How do you get an extra day of Yom Tov out of that? Does it say how you get an extra day of Yom Tov?
If it fell on Shabbos?
No, it's Amad v'tikna achar Shabbos kadesh Yisrael misangen shnei yomim. Why is that? Because just in case the first day of Pesach fell out on the Shabbos? Verkehrt. How does the Baitusim, how does their plan make us have an extra day of Yom Tov? I didn't chap how that makes it an extra Yom Tov. Does he explain it all? I didn't chap his cheshbon.
What do you ask? Why?
He said the time of the Tzedoki was that Moshe was a nice guy. So if he was a nice guy, it would make sense that he would want to make an extra day of Yom Tov for them. How does this plan that they had to make it on a Sunday create an extra day of Yom Tov?
Shabbos and Sunday.
So you always have a Shabbos and a Sunday. And by us, and the way we do it, you have Yom Tov in the next day. What do you mean? I mean, if Shavuos always would fall out the day after Shabbos, because of Shavuos, it was to help Shavuos. Because if Shavuos would always fall out on the day after Shabbos, so then there'd be 2 days of Yom Tov. That's what it means. It's 2 days Yom Tov are Shavuos. That's what it is. This way, if Shavuos always falls out on a Sunday, then you have a 2-day Yom Tov. Mashiach and us, Shavuos could be any day of the week.
Yeah, so you still have Shabbos and Yom Tov in that week.
Yeah, but you don't have 2 days, I guess, back to back.
I mean, back to back.
That's what it must be. So Zok to Gemara weiter. Zok to Gemara weiter. So the Gemara brought a raya. So that was a simcha that they proved that Shavuos could be any day of the week. Rabbi Lezer Omer, any tzarich. You don't need that raya. Why? Because you have another raya. Harei Omer tispar loch. Loch means it was talking to Bezdin. Svira tluya bebezdin. This is a counting that you need Bezdin to count. Any individual cannot make this counting. Why? Shehem yoidim lechadesh mimochres hashabos. Tishbalach, I'm sorry. They know how to be. In other words, it's Bezdin who determines when Rosh Chodesh is. So they could start telling us when to count from, because we're counting from the first day that we count is the 16th day of Nisan. We're counting from the second day Yom Tov. Which day Yom Tov is determined by Bezdin. Mimachas Shabbos, which says in the pasuk, doesn't literally mean Shabbos. It's Machas Yom Tov. Yotza Shabbos Bereshis, it can't be referring to Mamish Shabbos. Sheshvirasa b'chalodam. We don't need Bezdin to tell us when Sunday is. Everybody knows when Sunday is. So if you're telling me that you always start counting from the first Sunday after the first day of Pesach, then why is it a Tisper Loch to Bezdin? Anyone can count if the first day is Sunday. But if the first day means the second day of Yom Tov, then you need Bezdin to start the count, because Bezdin is going to determine what day Pesach is, because they're in charge of being Mekadosh the Chodesh. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Amar Torah Minei Yamim v'Kadesh. The Kadesh Chodesh, count days, 29 days, and then make a new Chodesh. Minei Yamim v'Kadesh Atzeres. The Torah also taught us that you count 49 days, and then you have Shavuos. So Ma Chodesh Samach L'Biyasai Nikr, just like the Chodesh, you could tell very close to when the Chodesh comes in, when it starts, because what happens is the moon reappears. So it'll be easy to see what that day is, right? Avatzeres, so too Shavuos, Samach L'Biyasai Nikeres. You could tell right when it arrives. Vim Taimer Atzeres L'Olam Achar Shabbos, if Atzeres will always be on the Sunday, Heich Tehei Nikeres Mi Shalafana, how are you going to tell which day it is? What does that mean? Zok Rashi. Ma chodesh shamach lebiyas cheshbon nikar me'emos eitascha limnos tainum yom chavtes mishas moel halavana. When the Levana reappears, then you know it's the new month. Avatzer shamach lebiyasoi minyan hachamishim nikar lahem yom kavua. They know day 50 when it is. Sheyaschila limnos boy. Tainum imachos yom tov rishon. They'll know exactly when to start counting from. Why? Because they count from the day after. They count from the day after the first day of Yom Tov. Shimamtinin ad lachar Shabbos. If they wouldn't count right away on the second day of Yom Tov, rather they would wait for the first Shabbos in Yom Tov to arrive, then ein sham heker yom kavua. Now you cannot tell from the moon exactly what day it is. They're starting on different days of the month. So it's not nicker from the month, from the moon, where they're holding. So therefore, since you have to be able to tell from the position of the moon where they're holding, what day of the month it is, therefore it has to be that you always start counting the day after the first day of Pesach, not any random day based on which day falls out to be a Sunday. Okay, Zok Gemara weiter. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Amar Torah, the Torah says, Havi Omer bePesach u'shtei lechem b'atzeres. Ma lahalon regel u'tchilas regel, Afghan regel u'tchilas regel. Just like by the shtei lechem, on Shavuos, it's regel who, and it's the beginning of the Yom Tov, so too the day of the Omer has to be the beginning of the Yom Tov. And if you're going to wait till after Shabbos, it might be at the end of the Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda ben Mesei Omer, Nemer Shabbos l'maylo, v'nemer Shabbos l'mato. There's two psukim, Ad mimochres ha-Shabbos ha-Shavias tishmu chamishim yoim, and then it says, Usvaytem lechem mimochres ha-Shabbos. So first it says, Usvaytem lechem mimochres ha-Shabbos, and then it says, Ad mimochres ha-Shabbos ha-Shavias tishmu chamishim yoim. So Nemer Shabbos l'maylo, v'nemer Shabbos l'mato. Mal alon regel utchilas regel samach lo, Just like it said, Ad Menachos HaShabbos HaShavios Tismur Chamishim Yoim. It means it's right at the beginning of Yom Tov. Afkan, so too, the day you start counting, it's Regel Tchilas Regel, meaning you start counting from the beginning of Pesach. Tchilas Regel Shamachla. Taner Ban, Usvaitam Lechem, Shetei Svira Lachol Echad Ve'echad. There's a mitzvah of everybody to individually count Sviras Omer. Menachos HaShabbos, Menachos Yom Tov, the first day after Yom Tov, the first day Chalamoid, or maybe it's like to Dukum say that you start counting the Budaka from a Sunday. Tispru Chamishim Yom. Kol Shvir Shat Sofer Lo Yehu Ela Chamishim Yom. When you're counting, it should always be 50 days. And if you're telling me it's referring to the first Sunday in Pesach, sometimes it'll end up being 51 days from the beginning of Pesach, or sometimes it could be 52 days from the beginning of Pesach, because if Shabbos is later in the week than the first day of Pesach. If Shabbos is all the way at the end of Yom Tov, you're really counting more than 50 days. I don't need that. It says, Tispar Lach Svira Tuluya Bebezin. It has to be a sphere that you need Bezdin for. Yotzah Shabbos Bereshis that you don't need Bezdin for. Shesvirasai Bechol Adam. Okay, let's stop here. So I believe we're a full blot ahead now. So we'll tomorrow learn Tezvav, and then we'll probably not learn on Wednesday and pick it up on Thursday. Okay, shkoich. With the easy reading Gemara.
Okay. Isn't that a full Amid ahead?
We're a blot ahead.
Or blood ahead?
If we're at the top of a Namad Aleph, then we have to be a blot ahead. Either we're not ahead at all,
we're
or
at the top
of
of Amid.
We finish at the top of Amid Aleph. We're on Samach Vav Amid Aleph.
Oh. Okay.
Where did the time go?
I don't know. Okay, go ahead.
Shkoich.